Well, I'm going to do it until my battery dies here. The present dwellers of White Lake Cottage included not only Mrs. Peppard herself, but her daughter, Eudoxia, a girl who was now acting as the Zoyland housemaid. Both mother and daughter slept in the anteroom of Will's private retreat at the back of the cottage, while Nell and her child slept in the front bedroom. Since the show season at Wookiee had come to an end, Will Zoyland had been employed by Philip in the much more important role of assistant overseer of the new tin mining works. The head overseer, an industrious and clever technician, was not good at keeping his subordinates up to the scratch, nor had he much initiative with regards to tracking out new veins of metal deposit. Thus, Zoyland's job at the tin mine was partly a disciplinary one and partly a geological one, neither of which occupations exactly suited his peculiar gifts. But he did not demand much salary, 10 times less, in fact, than Philip would have had to give to anyone else, and all the laborers on the work held him in respect because of his name. Lord P had announced that he would drive over in his dog cart from Markmoor Court, picking up Lady Rachel on his way through Glastonbury. The christening was roughly timed for between 4 and 5, and Matt Dicker had told Nell that he would try to come over himself soon after 3 so as to enjoy a little talk with her alone before her other guests arrived. Will Zoyland had come to the secret conclusion, after first setting eyes on his wife's infant, that this was none of his. But he had concealed that certainty so successfully that Nell had not the least suspicion that he had divined the truth. And this secret knowledge of his gave him a great and unfair advantage in the daily struggle for the mastery between them. For he found that to have such a weapon, and not to use it, was the strongest weapon he could possibly have. And he took full advantage of this. His position just then was in many respects a singular and crucial one. The fact that Nell Zoyland was suckling the child of herself, though only Mrs. Peppard herself helped her washing and dressing him, made it psychologically difficult for Will to start making love to her again. He had a curious penchant for babies, amounting almost to a mania for those odd little poppets, whose angers are so nerve-wracking and whose philosophical calm is so soothing. So that he won Nell's maternal gratitude willy-nilly by his tenderness to her offspring, especially as he consented to sleep on the couch in the parlor and to leave her and child the uninterrupted use of their bedroom. It had given Nell a queer kind of shock when he saw Mrs. Peppard making up that particular couch for the master of the house, that couch which had not been used as a bed by anyone since the day in March, you recall. Ugh. But Will's passionate devotion to the child disarmed her completely because it was more than she had dreamed would happen. And she took it to imply that he had not the least suspicion that the little Harry was not his. The baby on its side seemed to take to Will with a degree of awareness and attraction unusual at that age. He was a child of colossal egoism and of immense power of love. He loved Nell with a piquant zest that was delicious to behold, but his love for her was a hot, feverish, violent thing, while his response to Zoyland was a sort of rapturous calm. In his furious fits of temper, which were of a tragic intensity and prophetic of a future that made the girl tremble to think of, Zoyland alone could handle him, quell him, console him. Time and again, old Mrs. Peppard, who could do nothing with him, would say to Nell, "If it weren't for the master, thick moment 'ud fling itself into convulsions." Or something like that. "He can't not think of his own child," Nell would say to herself. But how could he have been so deceived when its pathetic little chin was so exactly like Sam's? She never considered. She was very grateful, too, at being let off all love-making, and this she attributed to Will's passion for the child. And it made her uneasy with a sort of shamefaced discomfort to think that she owed her escape from his amorous advances to this deception. But in this matter, too, as much as over the child, the girl, for all her feminine insight, had been completely outwitted by the crafty huntsman. It was really the sly old Zookie Pippard who engineered this treachery. Perhaps, being a relative of Mother Legs, she had it in her blood to play procuress. But it was she who had persuaded her daughter to come up to White Lake Cottage from a very good place at a farm near Witham Friary. And her arguments must have been very subtle ones, for the wench received, in return for her work, probably the lowest wage that had ever been paid to a maid, at any rate, in a gentlefolk's house. From Westbury Beacon on the north to Howish Escopey in the south. But Zookie was, as Mr. Weatherwax, who knew her uphill and Downdale, said to Penny, when those old gossips first learned who twere were looking after Missy Zoyland, the cunningest bitch badger this side of Tartan. Eudoxia Pippard, when she finally appeared in response to her crafty parents' beguiling hints, completely turned Will Zoyland's head. Having lived a chaste life for nearly half a year, and having recognized the fact that he had been made the breadwinner for another man's child, Zoyland found nothing in his passion for Nell's baby to prevent him from committing delicious adultery with Doxy Pippard. Eudoxia was indeed dedicated, it seemed, to give memorable delight to Lord P.'s bastard. She was not at all what you would call a pretty girl. Her lips were much too thin, her nose was a little twisted to one side, and her neck was decidedly too long. But she had one peculiarity which, as soon as she discovered it, set Zoyland's Varangian senses on fire, and that was the most satiny skin that every Glastonbury amorous had clipped. As Mailer would say, since the days of the Demoiselle Lynette of the Castle Perilous. It may be easily that, in the category of feminine desirability, such polished flanks, such slippery knees, such satiny hips, and all such other sinuous slenderness, do not by any means constitute what is called a classical beauty or even a romantic charm. But whatever they constitute, as they slide in or out of a seducer's arms, they evoke a ravishing and transporting satisfaction. Now there was an outside wooden staircase at the back of the house, leading into the ante-room of the smoking room, so that when Nell and Sam's child were fast asleep in the front of the house, Eudoxia could easily come in through the kitchen door. This door, Zookie remembered to leave it ajar, had well-oiled hinges, so that when Doxy found herself, at first with agitated surprise, but later with entrancing coquetry, clothed only in her nightgown and in the presence of the master of the house, lying upon his couch-bed, there was no danger of surprisal if they spoke in low whispers. Now Nell, although Zoyland had loved her dearly and had got great enjoyment from her, had never been really responsive to his embraces. Her body had responded faintly, her heart a little, but her inmost imaginative nerve, the crucial chord to the essential quiver of a girl's stirred senses, not at all. The full-blooded bastard, as many will be believed, had had many love before he became infatuated with Nell Spear, but none of those had been adepts at the art of provocation. None of these had been viciously exciting. Now Doxy Pippard possessed, among other original characteristics, a curious mania for retaining her virginity. Vicious and inflammable as she was, with the feverish, reckless, almost swooning intensity of the pseudo-consumptive type, she had lavished her nervous provocations on all her men, and yet had managed matters so skillfully as to be a maiden still. The mere idea of lying in the arms of the son of the Marquis of P was intoxicating to the romantic yearning of her snake-smooth, leaf-cool body. While the Herculean proportions of Zorlan as a human being fulfilled all her secretest girlhood dreams as to what a real masculine bedfellow should be. On the eve of the day of the christening, Eudoxia had come down to him soon after midnight, entering the kitchen by the door left unlatched by Zuki. And it was after a couple of hours of paradisiac dalliance, wherein her protection of herself from mortal sin prolonged her companion's tantalized delight beyond what he could have dreamed possible, that the couple sat suddenly on the single-pillowed couch bed under the heavily curtained window and started to listen with all their ears. What had disturbed them was an outburst of crying from the child, followed by Nell's voice calling Will's name. It is probable that no possible rearrangements of society, not even that most ideal commune pictured by Paul Trent, will ever bring it about that the fear of discovery in erotic infidelities will be abolished. Such alarms and excursions, such panic-stricken beatings of the heart, seem as deeply implicit in the fatality of human relations as it is the indestructibleness of jealousy itself. Zorland had already thrown out one of the Herculean limbs out of his bed, and with his heel on the floor was clutching the bedclothes preparatory to obeying his wife's summons, when Eudoxia, who had curled up her supple slenderness like a frightened grass snake, closed under the windowsill, heard Zuki's voice reassuring both mother and child. And that, my friends, will have to end it a little early today because I'm running low on battery and I'm frankly too lazy to plug it in right now. So until next time, see you from the gold Glastonbury. Cheers.